Welcome to the BioRossi Few and Far Between podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Alesse. So, where do CROs currently sit in the biotech industry? How have funding reports revised study and protocol design? And is AI poised to become the backbone of clinical trial execution? Well, today's guest is here to provide us with an in-depth look at the latest CRO trends. Joel White joins us on the podcast, and we are excited to have him. As the owner of Marketcap Consulting and with over 20 years of CRO experience, he has his finger on the pulse of the industry. In this episode, we'll dive into the latest in biotech funding developments, explore program pricing in a perfect world, and enter the debate on FSP solutions and CRO strategy. Also, be sure to stick around for the lightning round for great tips on improving efficiency, great reads, and uncovering the biggest news in biotech. Okay, let's start the podcast. Well, Joel, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Great to be with you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to have an opportunity to catch up with you, and in particular, as the first of my episodes in Few and Far Between, being able to focus on a topic that I'm pretty excited about. So thank you so much. Let's get started talking about the state of the industry. Everybody loves to understand where the trends are and what's happening in pharma, biotech, M&A. What are you expecting for 2026 in terms of the implications like for CROs and for sponsors?
Yeah, quite a bit. First of all, congratulations to you on this being your first episode in your new role. So I was very happy to see that. And
Thank you.
Congratulations. So 2026, today's Friday. I think it was Wednesday, or maybe before that IQVIA released its kind of industry overview report, and the headline when I first saw it was that biotech funding is down 20%, but that was for last year. That was all of last year compared to 2024. And I have not read the whole thing yet. So, but if you broke that down into the first half of the year versus the second half of the year, I would pretty much guarantee you that the first half of the year was far more than 20% down compared to the first half of the year before. Whereas a rebound undisputably started to occur in Q3 and accelerated in Q4 of last year. Some of the funding numbers I've seen so far this year show that we should not be down 20% this year. And what the increase will be, I don't know, but I'd be surprised if it's a decrease of any time. So it's looking good on that. I can't remember the name of the company, but I saw a $400 million biotech financing arrangement hit the wires. It was either this morning or last night. The news is good. Whereas early last year, I was seeing a lot of news around bankruptcies and everybody was talking about runway. Just all the signs are much more positive for this year. That's in terms of biotech funding. The value of equities and such on biotech and pharma. It's a little bit more of a mixed story. The entire market, not just our industry, is under significant distress right now because it's late March and the Iran war is ongoing and things like that. And that's putting stress on valuations. But on a relative basis, biotechs and pharmas, they're holding up well and they're outperforming a lot of other industries. That was not the case last year for the first half of last year at all. So overall, looks very positive to me, and that is showing through in CRO results. And again, I started seeing that in Q3 of last year, really picked up in Q4, and we won't know what it's like in real time right now for another couple months. Yeah.
Sure, without your crystal ball, of course.
Ball.
It's really relevant to compare to other industries because we do get a bit myopic in terms of what we're living in within life science and clinical trials in particular, and it's an important point in that comparison. So let's zero in now on the CRO space in particular. Are we at max CRO? In other words, do you think we're going to see non-organic growth from the majors? What's your view there?
Yeah. I don't think we've ever been at max CRO since CRO started forming in the 80s and 90s. CROs are growing as we speak. For the most part, I say that without having a view into Icon's performance. We still won't know that for another month or so because of accounting issues. But just about everyone is reporting positive revenue growth and have been for a couple quarters now. And several were even during those dark times of first half of last year and in 2024. So we are not at max CRO until CROs stop growing. And
Fair.
in aggregate, as much as you can say CROs in aggregate, they are growing, whether you're looking at the top 6 or a wide collection of small mid-size where there's not a lot of public visibility into that. So so I don't think that we are at max CRO. Are we at max large CRO? That's a different question. We'll see. Where we've got 6 CROs who, in terms of size, are much larger than the 7th and below. So will we have 6 forever? I don't know, but CROs as an ecosystem, I guess you could say we're not at max.
Fair. Well, we're starting to see now the blur of site networks. This week, Icon and Bara spoke about their arrangements with regard to optimizing site relationships. I'm curious how a CRO owning sites actually benefits the sponsor and your view on that evolution.
Yeah. There are benefits, there are challenges. I'm not going to get too company specific, but I think that you would be hard pressed inside or outside of Icon to be able to say that who probably owns the most sites of any CRO, to say that they are gaining some enormous benefit from site ownership. Is it a detriment? I don't know about that. You just get really mixed messages on it. Case in point, up until about 2 years ago, Icon's former CEO, Steve Cutler, was saying that at that time, up to 10% of all their clinical trial activity as Icon, the CRO, was being run through their wholly owned sites. My guess is that he just meant infectious disease research. I don't know if it extended beyond that. He said our goal was 30%. Right? This was roughly 2022, 2023 timeframe. Our goal is 30%. And our number one M&A focus is acquiring sites and site networks. After he said that, they never bought another site. Never. And you don't hear about it anymore. It's not an M&A priority. You just don't hear it at all. Whereas IQVIA has continued making some acquisitions, including a decent sized early phase oncology SMO last year. And for the first time in, I believe, 20 plus years, IQVIA now owns a phase 1 site. So IQVIA wouldn't do that unless they had and foresaw a benefit going into the future. So, and they've acquired sites before. So, overall, is it a plus or a minus? I definitely don't see it as a necessity. It's definitely not a necessity. And whether it's a plus or a minus depends on how well you operate it after you
Certainly. And the execution.
acquire it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say on that is that if you spend too much time on LinkedIn, you would think that CROs owning sites is a new thing. It's not. People tend to think that early phase, phase 1 healthy volunteer sites aren't real sites. Those are real sites who see real patients. I've been able to visit a couple of them over the past couple of years, and so CROs owning sites, that's not a new thing. That's been the case for decades. And there used to be some publicly traded CROs who owned significant numbers of sites back in the 90s and early 2000s. So, not a new thing, not inherently a bad thing, definitely not inherently a conflict of interest or anything like that, in my view, and in the views of folks like the owners of Velocity and such who have publicly said, I don't care if CROs own sites. So, not inherently a good or a bad thing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and that's the nature of it too. Is we're always looking for mechanisms for efficiency, and these consolidations intentionally are seeking to deliver that. So we'll have to watch that space. Indeed. So it wouldn't be a relevant conversation if we didn't introduce AI, and this is about the right time to do it at this point. And the AI backbone in particular, this is ever present, this conversation. You framed it as that AI is becoming the backbone of trial design in 2026. So what happens in the mid-tier CRO space, perhaps if they can't afford to build their own proprietary ecosystem? Will we see tech-driven consolidation?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a backbone yet. It seems to be under consideration by just about everybody. And, there is some actual real adoption by a number of CROs. And then when it comes to AI, several of the predominant technology providers in the space, Metadata, Viva, they've got some real products around it, though it's just not as widespread as you would think. Viva, by far the dominant player in the TMF space, their agent isn't out there yet. In March 2026. It's not out there in full real-time production with wide adoption. So, and that just tells you about how long, some of these things take, even from tech companies who you would think would be working on this full time, all hands on deck. That's not a criticism of them by any means. It just shows, how much time and effort and validation and privacy concerns and things like that have to be accounted for when rolling these things out. So, where from my own vantage point, where CROs have adopted it so far, it is through, automating certain repetitive labor tasks and things like that. I do a lot of benchmarking work, Melissa, and I still just kind of chuckle a bit if I see a CRO has a unit where, they're pricing in 2 to 3 hours per meeting for meeting minutes. It's just like, we could have an AI recording this and provide a good, overview of our call, and you just wait on it. You wait 5 minutes and it's there, and you don't have to do anything. So, there's some low hanging fruit there. And there are plenty of areas of CRO operations where there is a lot of repetitive human tasks that are ripe for automation. So whether that comes from AI or just smarter programming, we'll see. But I wouldn't put it in backbone status yet. It's just opportunistic to find efficiencies here and there.
Well, and this will be the challenge for service providers like Biorossi in that tech-driven efficiency, how we can continue to take cost out of clinical development for sponsors and really operationalize the promise of these technologies.
Yeah, I mean, where would you say it's at from a Biorossi standpoint?
Well, it's certainly in exactly the repetitive attributes where, quite frankly, meeting minutes is a great example. Other attributes of either communications or documentation engagement. TMF is an excellent arena for automation and efficiencies, particularly because it is a rather systematically driven deliverable. So those are the key areas, I think, where there's a lot of interest, and we're still in the discovery stage, is where we can apply it in terms of the scientific automation, whether it's about protocol design or even trial strategy and mechanisms for looking at being more exploratory in different scenarios instead of just picking what's worked last, looking analytically across multiple scenarios and doing the cost-benefit analysis. Very, very relevant for early funded sponsors who are very aware of capital constraints, and factoring those things in early in design can have huge downstream impact.
Yeah, I mean, here would be the trigger for me to say, yes, AI is the backbone of CRO operations. Sign the contract with the sponsor, begin to start work. You know how many plans have to be set up. Project management plan, communication plan, risk management plan, data
plan,
management.
Medical
all
monitoring,
those things.
all of them. Yeah.
If you sign the contract, the protocol is final, which, by the way, it's rarely final when the contract is signed.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So once the protocol is final and some of these things are final, you can have excellent first drafts of all those plans. And then you can, as a CRO, you can develop the database around those different plans in the protocol. Your statistical analysis plan can be derived from that. ICF, all these things, until you get to a place where a CRO is pretty, or any company is pretty hands-off developing all those documentations, validating them, et cetera, with minimal human effort, which no one's there. No one's there. I don't think, nor should they be, nor could they be. When that day, if and when that day comes, then it's the backbone. Until then, it's a opportunity.
I agree. Yeah, it's an exciting thing to think forward about. Indeed.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears slightly from some of those topics into the buying and managing of CRO services, which my intent here is we have a lot of folks who follow the pod who are in that role. They are seeking CROs, they are evaluating them, and there's a lot of insights that you bring. I know as a keen follower of your LinkedIn feed, there's so many important insights that you're getting from your in-depth knowledge of the sector. So let's dive into some of those details. In particular, how
Please.
CROs price. This is perhaps a mysterious thing for many, but what is happening with pricing and what is biotech's key supplier?
Yeah, pricing, it's a very manual, custom process, and that's a good thing for this industry. And a couple things. When I started out my career in the early 2000s, it was not in clinical research. It was for a large retailer where you had hundreds of millions of customers, or at least millions. Maybe when times were rough, you only had millions instead of hundreds of millions. The largest CROs have thousands of customers, and small mid-sized CROs have hundreds or dozens of customers. Okay, and at a large retailer, or an Amazon, or even an IBM, you are performing millions of transactions per year. Call each millions of purchases, perhaps billions of purchases. As a CRO, you're having thousands of transactions, and so the average transaction size at a Walmart is probably what, $200, $100, something like that. For a CRO, it can be hundreds. It will be at least hundreds of thousands of dollars, and at the larger CROs, it's millions. And so, you are not doing some hands-off automated pricing for a $6 million or $60 million opportunity. You got to make sure you've got some smart people behind the wheel of that. There are numerous people involved. So how does it take place? Today's a Friday, so an RFP comes in. If you haven't noticed, most of the RFPs tend to come in near the end of the day. All right. So let's say best case, it's around noon right now. So let's say best case, you get the RFP now from a customer. You may or may not have had advance notice that RFP was coming. Let's be generous and say that you had a heads up that the RFP was probably coming this week, and it shows up now. That RFP will typically have a 2-week turnaround, so it'll be due 2 Fridays from now, maybe 3, but we're going to say 2. So you have 10 business days. Typically, the RFP is coming in on the end of the day. So if it always feels like, if you're leading an RFP process and your suppliers seem a bit rushed, it's because they are. So yours is probably not the only RFP that came in today or this week. And so the CRO is having to triage who is going to lead the pricing of that project. It's a proposal manager or a pricing manager, someone like that. And so let's say that's all sorted out within, by the end of the day. We know who is going to work on an RFP. Those people have to be notified, and then they have to set up a call, because just because the RFP came in right now, the 7 or 8 people who are going to look at it, review it, they can't drop everything they're doing right now to go look at that RFP. And so, by Monday or Tuesday of next week, ideally, there is a team strategy call to review that. And that's not just the pricing person and the business development person. Those are different operational leads to look at the protocol, the RFP, all the materials provided, and then start to figure out, okay, well, for this study, we got to figure out, okay, what countries are we going to run it in? How many sites are we going to have it in? Even if the RFP is very clear on the expectations of where to run the trial and how many sites, you're still giving your evaluation as to whether those are appropriate numbers or not. And so let's say in a perfect world, by middle to late next week, you've got a great idea. You've got a pretty crystal clear idea of how you want to price it. The overwhelming vast majority of CRO pricing is done in Microsoft Excel. At least 3 to 4 of the top 6 CROs price it in Excel. One of them, IQVIA, has said that they're looking to move into a web-based tool by next year to tell you about how long it takes to build something like that, which also tells you these are extraordinarily complex pricing tools in many cases, especially if you are a full-service global CRO. It just has to take a lot into account. And so, that's a lot going on within that two-week time frame. You're often doing like a miniature feasibility of the protocol, and at the same time, you've got your data management people, your statistics people, all these different people looking at different assumptions and telling the pricing person, assume this, not that. So you may think, well, why doesn't the pricing person know all of that? Well, I've been in this industry since 2006, 20 years, and I wouldn't know an SDTM domain if you put one in front of me, unless it was labeled like that, right? We're not experts in these things, but a lot of the RFPs require you to figure out how many of different types of tasks apply and units apply, and it's a very, very complex situation. Last piece of evidence I'll give for that is the most common service I provide is benchmarking for CROs, and so not just their hourly rates, but also their hours per unit. And sometimes a client will say, "Well, we've got like 500 different units." Okay, that's par. That's par for the course, especially if you're global and you're full service. So, very, very complex situation with hundreds of variables often. So, if as a biotech or a pharma, you're wondering, why does the price change all the time? Because those 100 variables are not going to stay the same, especially based off of your version 1.0 protocol outline.
There are very few fixed variables in costing a clinical trial. And then from the day you launch, you're likely modifying your plan, which has a downstream effect.
Yeah, so your final protocol is rarely final, right?
It is rarely final. But we also have the challenge of the operational nuance and the assumptions that are made from the clean slate versus what we have to adjust once we begin execution. And I think this is where oftentimes in conversations with biotechs, they're asking to see the math. They don't understand what goes into the calculations for pricing their programs. We've had a lot of pricing and proposal discussions that often point to are there traps, are there pricing traps, and sponsors can sometimes fall into that when they're comparing. They have their bid grid, they want to see against the 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 or 6 CROs that they've engaged in their pricing evaluation, and they don't have apples to apples. Why is that? Why are they seeing very different calculations from one CRO to another?
Not all CROs call the same task the same thing because their SOP is different, or their last head of data management just didn't like the way something was named. One company's figure is another company's graph. Just as one, silly example, but all these things, all these things matter. So the tasks that are in play are named different things at different companies. They're also rolled up in different ways. So you just think of basic site management, capital S, capital M site management. It's something that's pretty universal across CROs, but some CROs will have an all-encompassing unit for site management. Some will break out the actual meetings with the sites from maybe an SAE management versus different components of site management. So they may have 5 or 6 different things on their unit grid that is equivalent to a single rolled up unit for another CRO. On top of that, you as a sponsor may want to see, well, I want to know the roles and hours per unit of how you do it. And when you start comparing, everybody calls a CRA a CRA. Like that's at least
the only,
consistent.
And maybe project manager. Those are probably the two core roles.
No. That's what. No? But even within those, you start breaking out. Some companies will have up to 3 or 4 levels of CRA on their rate card. So they'll have 1, 2, 3 and principal, or senior or something like that. Project manager. I would say the majority of CROs have a blended project manager rate. Some have associate, then a project manager, then senior, and super senior. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But that's at least a role that is named the same thing. When you get into data management, pharmacovigilance, which could be called safety, or I've seen other variations of it. One person's clinical data manager is actually another person's clinical data associate, or analyst, or specialist. I could go on. Welcome to my benchmarking world, right? Where you're trying to compare these things. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
And so
precisely
you can
it.
say, oh my gosh, why is your data management lead doing data cleaning? Why do you have a manager doing your data review and cleaning? Well, that's actually our, this other company does it at an associate level. Well, there's that's just what we call it.
Processes
We
differ, and
that's our level. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's perhaps an unfair burden on sponsors to need to suddenly become experts in how pricing grids are built and differentiate them to be able to make a purchasing decision. I think
it's self-imposed.
It is.
No CRO is going to demand that. Oh yeah, I'm going to provide you my roles and hours per unit. There's no reason to. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I look forward to the day when we can move perhaps past trying to get through all those details and have something that is a more productive way to look at defining scope and managing cost consciousness.
Yes.
Looking to be very transparent in terms of the finances without slowing things down.
Yeah, I would say pay more attention to the assumptions page. That's
precisely,
and it's much more important if one CRO is recommending 20 sites and the other 15. That is vastly more important than getting into those details. That kind of apples to apples at the role hourly unit level. I am not an outsourcing consultant. I am not a procurement consultant. But all I'll say, Melissa, is that if I was and I was being paid on an hourly basis, hell yeah, I would be asking for a role and hourly unit breakout for every conceivable item, and I'd be asking tons of questions because that's what I'm incentivized to do if I'm in that role.
Yeah, that's an important perspective. It's each person in the process is controlling for perhaps a different outcome, which is important to note.
Yeah. You gotta on the buying side, you gotta be cautious about job security work, and there's no better way. We'll go too much into it, but yeah, just make sure that your procurement teams aren't spinning their wheels looking at a bunch of stuff that's not actually affecting the overall pricing.
And yet, a lot of the sponsors that we work with don't have the luxury of a procurement team. They are lean. They are relying on their head of ClinOps or perhaps a financial analyst to aid them in this, and it's a very different journey for them, certainly.
Yes. Yeah. It's there's no one size fits all when it comes to how that's structured. But so long story short, but CROs have to cram a lot into that 2-week process, and then when you come back to them the next time, something has changed, and the price will change.
Always. I wanted to focus on a different topic, and that is the debate of FSP versus full service. These outsourcing methodologies, they trend, they move back and forth throughout the industry and at different sizes of organizations. There's a perception that the functional service provider, the FSP model, is on the rise. When funding gets tight, it seems to be a lever that sponsors can use for a little more efficiency in their R&D spend. You've noticed that hasn't always been the case recently, and I'm curious, when should a small biotech choose an FSP over a full service?
Yeah. There's probably not many use cases for a small biotech point in FSP, mostly because in an actual FSP model, which is where you're almost renting, people, personnel on really almost like a fractional basis. You as the buyer of those services, you basically have to be an expert at resource management, because otherwise, if the effective hourly rate of paying for someone on an FSP basis versus a full service is going to be lower in most cases on an FSP. But if you sign an FSP agreement to get a full-time, or 5 full-time clinical data managers, for the 3 studies you plan to run, and just don't actually have enough work for them or get them involved things that isn't really what you had planned for, then you're going to end up massively overpaying compared to if you worked with a CRO on a full service basis. So for small biotechs, like you said, like the 6 or 8 person company, they are probably not core competent resource managers. That's what CROs are. So there's really not great use cases for small biotechs and FSPs, for as much as can generalize that statement. It is almost entirely a large pharma, large biotech game because they do have people who are expert resource managers. Now, in terms of the relationship of industry funding to FSP, it's drawing pretty broad lines here. But when times are lean, which they're opening up now, so I would not say funding. Funding probably always feels tight across the industry, except for like the heydays of 2020, 21, and some times like that. But funding is opening up. But when funding is really tight, and when large pharma in particular are looking to downsize, you saw this openly with Pfizer a little less than 2 years ago, if my timing is right, where they took a bunch of full service work from Icon and converted it to FSP with Icon, but it was, when times are tough and it's time to start cutting, that can be seen as a way to do it. Not so much converting, but saying like, oh my gosh, we're going to run all this stuff on a full service basis. Partly because when funding is tight, Melissa, there's not as much urgency to run new trials. So you have more time to plan things out. You have more time to try to figure out, okay, how can we effectively manage, these 60 resources that we bring on an FSP when funding is coming through heavy, as it appears to be more so now. You have a couple things going on. One, traditionally that's led more by biotech, which does a lot less FSP resourcing. So in relative terms, full service would outperform FSP in a looser funding environment because the charge is being led by biotech. There's a couple things that I'm just seeing, right now where the large public CROs, they have to include pass-throughs in their revenue and their financial reporting. And by their own, not just by their own statements, but in the actual numbers themselves, their pass-through spend is growing much more disproportionately higher than their organic services revenue. Well, FSPs typically have very little to zero pass-throughs. So if FSP was on the rise, you would expect to see the opposite. That's not the case right now. I always like to point out that the undisputed number one fastest growing CRO of significant scale is MedPace. There's really no doubt about that. They have 0.00% FSP business. If FSP was strongly on the rise, you would not expect the fastest growing CRO to have zero FSP business. There's other things we could go into too, but I'm by no means saying FSP is doomed at all. It's got an extremely valuable place in the industry, but just don't let any white papers or webinars convince you that it's taking over the world. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I think too, it's the other component of this is at a strategic level when an organization is seeking to variabilize cost. These are larger themes, and having some flexibility about transition from fixed to variabilized labor cost is really, to me, the wind that will change from an outsourced model or an insourced to that go-between FSP. Yeah.
But there's a little bit of an irony. This just gets into call it personal opinions, but there's a take that full service outsourcing is a lot less transparent than FSP. It is more complex, there's no doubt, but that it's less transparent. And I would just counter argue that under full service, what you're paying per unit for almost every single task, regulated and unregulated, that's going on in the trial. In FSP, you're paying for 150, 160 hours a month for a statistician in Romania. Where's unless you know exactly what they're doing, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, there's you're not getting any more transparency from that than you are any of your employees.
You don't have task completion as a metric unless you're managing that yourself.
That's right. Yeah, you can, with a full service contract, you can go back and say, oh, okay, yeah, we ended up having 120 SAEs, and here's how much I paid for all of those things to be processed, reported, et cetera. Whereas under a pharmacovigilance FSP, that's a lot more. It can be a lot more difficult to do. Yeah.
Indeed. So let's talk about contracting and particularly the red flags. So beyond the price tag, which we've already discussed, can be sometimes difficult to compare from one CRO to another. What's one specific clause in a CRO master service agreement that sponsors almost always overlook but later regret?
Yeah. The large pharmas really don't overlook anything. All right, so let's get that large pharmas, large biotechs. Like, let's get that out of the way, right? They don't really miss anything. In fact, that can often be the reverse. Is what are some things in a pharma template being pushed on you that the CRO might miss? In the smaller biotech, there can be some things. Now, I am just in my background and my focus. I'm much more finance and pricing focused. So some things that can be overlooked is actually what things could be missing in a CRO template that you may want some certainty around. So exchange rates, is one thing. As we speak, the U.S. dollar is just all over the freaking place, and so without exchange rate controls in your MSA or extremely vague or loose or generous terms, you could be getting a significant change order or unexpected invoice on a euros or a GBP contract because its value moved against some other currency that you weren't even aware was a factor in the contract. Inflation is damped down right now, but a lot of MSA templates don't address inflation, and so if it's important to you, especially if you're doing a lot of T&M contracting, or just a lot of things where rates are subject to change over time, you want to make sure that there's some type of an index reference in there to kind of keep a lid on it. And this isn't so much an MSA issue, but you'd want to know how inflation is being handled, in the price that's being sent to you. I remember during the post-COVID days, right, when inflation was overtaking the world. More than one CRO I saw where they send a budget, you have all your unit prices and such in the contract. You would have no way of knowing that those unit prices had zero inflation in there unless you looked at the size 6. It's like those TV commercials, right, where they fly through the terms and conditions with the person talking 100 miles an hour
fast.
At 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Size 6 font at the bottom, and even that just a vague statement that CRO has the right to apply annual increases to the rates starting on the first calendar year. And so you could be receiving a budget in November and not knowing and thinking, oh, okay, the unit price for the SAE is $2,500 per, not knowing that CRO has the right to boost that to whatever the hell they want in 6 weeks' time.
See 3, 4, 5% increase to your overall cost before you're even through your first deliverable, your first milestone.
Yeah. So again, I'm finance pricing oriented, so I can't really speak to liquidated damages and
of course.
Confidentiality
in the
stuff.
Pricing lane, I think that's exactly what we're looking for your insights.
I can tell you, man, one thing I wish I knew more about, and there are experts far more knowledgeable, is some of the data privacy piece. The founder CEO of Florence Healthcare, not a CRO, a tech company, he put something on LinkedIn recently. Ryan, talking about some of the things that are being pushed on them about not allowing AI in contracts. So that's an interesting area for me. I don't know what's being missed, or it's probably the over examined, but there's some interesting stuff there. Not my field though.
No, but certainly one that needs constant refresh. So maybe the underlying theme is if a template hasn't been refreshed with regard to data privacy in recent months, it's probably outdated.
That's right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Great. Good tips. Thank you. Yep. It's time for the lightning round. Are you ready?
Lightning round, yes. Okay.
We're going to go quick through a few summary questions, some fun things to have you bat back to me. All right, here we go. What's a great read for people who want to learn more about clinical research?
Yeah, so for clinical research, one that just came out a few months ago, it's a book called Beyond the Science. It's by a gentleman named Gary Zamet, who is the founder CEO of Clinilabs, a CNS-specific CRO. Great book, one of the only books, if not the only book I've ever read about. He talks about clinical research in general. That's why I'm answering your question that way. But he also talks about founding a CRO and
It's a
managing
very
it over
personal
20 years.
story. Yeah.
Very personal.
Yeah. Very personal.
Yeah. So
Which makes it a
really
better
good,
read.
really good read. Yeah. There's
It's
also
not technical.
yeah, and if you're looking for something more academic, there's a lot of clinical research programs now. Not the case when I was coming out of school,
That's
Melissa.
right.
So there's a lot of just textbooks.
That's right.
Good textbooks on it. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. But no, I agree. Gary's book is a great read. Yeah.
Gary's is more fun. Yeah.
Yes. So for your LinkedIn content, as I mentioned earlier, I know you apply this into all of your consulting work. Where do you source your research on CROs?
So many places. My number one source is the reporting and commentary of the publicly traded CROs.
Sure.
So yes, they produce earnings reports. I think a lot of people think that's all they do, but there is always an earnings call, and I find their commentary. I just read the transcripts because it's a lot faster. Their commentary is extremely enlightening. Beyond that, there's Baird, Jefferies, different investment banks and such, where I've kind of weaseled my way into getting their getting their information, and very, very, very valuable.
Yeah, great. Well, and we certainly find the value in them as you distill and give us those insights. So thank you for that. What are some good sources on biotech funding and equities performance?
Yeah, that's where you get into some of these hard to get sources. In fact, it was Baird. One of the light bulb moments for me last year was 2 of the 3 worst biotech funding months ever in their database were the first half of last year. And I just remember almost flippantly thinking, I can't get worse from here. That ended up being true, thankfully. They do month over month. So that was that's an example. That's on the biotech funding side. Equities, it's equities. So it's publicly traded stuff. I follow different baskets of companies and just kind of flip through their charts once or twice a month just to see if there's any bizarre stuff going on. And there has been over the past month.
Indeed.
One of the top 6 CROs has a major accounting investigation, and nothing will torpedo any company's stock price like accounting irregularities. Yeah, it's tough.
Certainly. Yeah, that is tough. Okay, so you talked earlier about the 6 global megas. Will we have more or fewer by 2030?
My crystal ball says 1 fewer.
Okay.
1 fewer. And I'm
we'll
not thinking
come back
of
to you in
one
2030
company.
and check you on that.
Yeah, I'm not thinking of one company in particular. I just that's my guess would be 5 in 2030, not more. I would be very surprised by more. I don't know how logistically that would happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tomorrow problem.
Yes.
Next question for you: what are the 2 or 3 service areas in the CRO offerings that you think are the best candidates for efficiency?
Apologies to my TMF friends. TMF number 1. I don't even know there's a close second. TMF and then pharmacovigilance and data management.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. So that would be my top 3.
All right. Final question in the lightning round. A CRO bid is 30% lower than the median. Great deal or red flag?
Yeah, a warning flag, but a potential really good deal. Look at the assumptions. If they bid fewer sites, if they bid a shorter study, make sure you understand why and that you believe it. Yeah. And then ask the others why they're longer.
Right.
But, don't throw it out. Like there's some old stereotypes, right? Oh, you collected 6, throw out the lowest, throw out the highest. Don't, first of all, that's really disrespectful to the people you invited to these processes, but that'd be pretty lazy. I can't imagine myself doing that.
Sure. Well, and if we are delivering on the promise of efficiency and lowering costs through tech enablement, we should start to see those numbers coming down, and the assumptions should demonstrate how they are coming down.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, well, so those assumptions should come down unless cost savings from some of these things means sponsors want even more complex protocols. That is a multi-year trend that is showing no signs of slowing down the level of complexity and protocols. And that's one of my kind of like secret guesses, secret forecasts. I try not to predict the future too much, but I think that if CRO pricing in certain areas comes down in a noticeable way, that sponsors will just want more trials and more complex trials, and it will just offset any threat to the CRO business model. That's my guesswork there.
Well, and it's always interesting to try and see around those corners. So
Yeah.
Thank you. I knew this would be an insight-rich conversation. Thank you so much. This has been a delight. Really appreciate you being on the pod.
Oh, my pleasure. Same to you.
Thank you.
Hi, Melissa. How are you? Great episode.
Thank you, Adam. Good to see you.
You too. I really enjoyed listening to Joel's insight on the current CRO market. I want to start off the questions with study and protocol pricing. It seems like each CRO uses a unique lens. Are you able to talk a little bit about the similarities behind the differences?
Oh, but that's an important and tricky question to unwind. Oftentimes, sponsors are still trying to establish the strategy for their drug development plan. And so protocols at the point that a CRO is initially looking at them to price out study execution are sometimes not yet finished. They may be just a synopsis or an initial strategy, but it tends to be quite iterative with the CRO partner to then establish, well, if we're choosing this approach, that actually will either reduce cost or it'll increase time. And those variables end up iterating in numerous cycles with those engagements. So it's hard to say that there's a different lens. It's more about where you're in the engagement model between the sponsor and the CRO.
That's a great way to define it better, I think. It kind of leads me to another question about how the final protocol is rarely final. I thought that was very profound, and to be honest, it sounds completely applicable to every project, program, blueprints in every single industry that is out there.
Sure.
Is this iteration always expected, or is there a way to lock it down?
Well, locking it down is to everyone's advantage because it certainly can then help control costs and have better predictability in terms of timelines. But with locking down, you may risk not being able to achieve your scientific goals. You may risk not being able to be competitive. You may risk achievement of the end result being too rigid. The challenge is every iteration, every adjustment, every amendment carries an incredible cost. And so my recommendations in how to lock it down is to provide as much information up front to examine what the options might be so that we can then work more collaboratively to define a better path. Some sponsors are really keen on just getting an early signal and then deciding whether additional capital investment will follow. Other sponsors may be trying to differentiate from a competitor, so their development path needs to have those considerations. Or you might be looking at a full-fledged proof of concept that needs a lot of rigor, numerous endpoints. That's, again, a different modality, which would have protocol considerations that would differentiate it from the other two examples. So it's that level of exchange and getting super clear on what the trial is intending to deliver that can help prevent adjustments downstream. Eliminating them entirely, I'm not sure that's the goal, but trying to reduce how much trial and error are on the fly is certainly to everyone's benefit.
And it really seems like it could be more of a communication piece in making sure that there is alignment, but there is also back and forth between every stakeholder on the project.
Sure. Which, you need to build the trust to be able to have that level of consultation and transparency and look at how that feedback can influence the path forward.
Very cool. So working for BioRossi, I've seen the market rebound, and it seems like it's getting closer and closer every year to a very positive position, but not quite there yet. What do you still think is holding the industry back?
Well, I think it depends by which metric you are measuring. We certainly continue to see an increase in investment in this space, but what the investments are going toward is generally later stage in development. So where it's super tricky is earlier stage development. the pool of resources have a far greater volume of competitors in it, and therefore the success for fundraising in early stage development appears to be a lower ratio. But on balance, there is more funding, more trials, more activity, which therefore means that there's more to do. If you're a CRO, there are more trials to seek to support and manage. If you're a sponsor, there are more trials to bring forward. What's shifting is the landscape, both in terms of how the funding is being applied, but also then in terms of how sponsors and providers are seeking to execute, particularly looking at lower cost regions, looking at mechanisms for being incredibly conscientious about capital and constraints around capital. And then, of course, how are we applying the benefits of technology enablement to accelerate trial delivery and reduce costs? That needs to actually flow through to the bottom line. Otherwise, the promise of technology is not delivering the rewards expected.
Exactly. Okay. Last question.
Yeah.
I don't believe it's a podcast if we don't talk about AI a little bit. I think Joel definitely hit on the inherent efficiency and cost savings factor in AI in relation to CROs and their sponsors. Do you agree?
I do agree. Well, and if we think specifically in the realm of clinical trial delivery, because the application of AI in life science is vast, and there are multiple components of engagement from discovery through to design, through to delivery, through to commercialization. But if we just look at the specifics of clinical trial delivery that the CROs tend to be at their core model, there are so many mechanisms by which application of efficiency drivers can help reduce manualized or repetitive work. And those are in place across the clinical trial life cycle. But there's also mechanisms to also get smarter about the design of the program. So to the earlier point of how do we prevent continuing to amend the protocol and the incurring costs associated with downstream change, we can now begin modeling those things and start to predict where there's risk and make better decisions earlier on, both to protect capital, but also to ensure that the delivery is much more, we've mitigated the risks of that delivery, and we've looked at options to consider along the way. So that's what I'm very excited about, and seeing our teams advancing here in our organization. I know that it's an industry-wide conversation. Every event we're going to, every conference, these are the topics that are getting the podium for sure.
Excellent. Okay, well, a great episode with Joel, and many more great guests to come. So thank you, Melissa.
All right. Thanks, Adam.